Okay, students of the cognitive psychology class, we're ready to get started. I decided for this very first module that there won't really be any discussion-oriented questions for this first one. I'm going to try to give you some background to the history of cognitive psychology. So if you see the little outline there, it's just a brief little agenda. You can download that. What you basically want to do is type up kind of simple summaries that really show that you understand the essential ideas of what I'm sharing in this acoustic recording. So let's start it off. If you look at the history of cognitive psychology, we start with something I'm using in the physio class as well. You see that 100 plus 25, and you all know what the answer to that is, right? 125. Well, the reason I share this with you in the first task, or the first part of the outline, is I wanted to go over what the steps were that enabled you to answer this question. So what were the steps? And there are quite a few steps involved in the processing of this, so let's just go over this. It starts off with the light from those stimuli, the 100 and the 25, the light hits your retina. So step number one is the light from those stimuli hit your retina. If it's completely dark in the room, you can't see it, you will not get the answer. So step one is light hitting the retina. Step number two, inside your retina, specifically your rods and cones, a process happens. It's a process I couldn't remember in my physio tape from last night, but it's a process known as transduction. Transduction, the light energy is changed from light energy to basically neuronal energy, if you know anything about action potentials. So step two is the light is changed to action potentials. And then step three is that electrochemical energy, action potentials in neurons, that goes all the way up to your brain. So from your eyes, it goes up to your brain. So that's step three, is the action potentials firing all the way up to your brain. Step four, very important. Step four is perception. When that information gets up to your brain, you perceive it. Your brain perceives what those stimuli are. Now, step number five is very, very important. Once you perceive those stimuli, those symbols, if you will, step number five is where you actually figure out what those symbols mean. You realize that the 100 stands for 100. You know there's a plus sign. You remember what that means. That means to add. And the 25, the 2 and the 5 stand for 25 equals means add them up and get the result. So your memory works. Your memory accesses what those symbols mean. Step number 6 might be that after you access what those symbols mean, you might do some mental imagery or mental arithmetic. You might add those two numbers up. And you'll add those two numbers up mentally, so that's mental processing, and then you will get a result of 125. And then after that, your mind then has to send a signal through your physiology, through your body again, to actually have a motor response. So back down through the neurons, information goes, and then you say, as the last thing, the motor response, you say 125. So there are a bunch of steps in there. And of course, the 125 is the response. So why do I share this with you? Well, I wanted to give you the perspective of some of these different fields in psychology. So if you're interested just in the stimulus and the response, that would kind of be the field of behaviorism. You have a stimuli and you have a response. Step one and the last step. If you're interested in cognitive psychology, you would probably be interested in those steps of accessing the memories for what those symbols are, and then doing the mental arithmetic on those and getting the result. So that is the step of cognitive psychology. If you're interested in how your eyes convert the energy into action potentials, transduction, that's considered the world of perceptual psychology. Sensation. It's kind of the field of sensation and sensory physiology in psychology. And then the other thing I wanted to share with you, remember when it got up to the brain first, we said we have perception. Well, the difference between perception and cognition, usually we have perception first and then cognition. The easy example to illustrate that is the idea of a little baby. If you put these stimuli in front of a little baby, they would perceive them quite well. They have very good vision, 20/20 vision by the age of 6. But what they don't have is they don't have cognitive processes. A baby would perceive the 100 plus 25, but wouldn't know what to do with it. So in cognitive psychology, and in this class we're really going to focus on these kind of mental things that are going on with memory and with information processing, as it would be. So that's basically what we study. And actually, in the field of cognitive psychology, I should probably give this to you as well, we study many different subjects, especially language perception is very important, memory, attention, and problem solving. You can kind of make a mnemonic out of that. PALM, problem solving, attention, language, and memory. So that's number one. If you want to write some notes on that, that would be good. Let's go next into a little kind of historical review, and this is actually going to be part of your book. If you go into the first chapter, I'm going to kind of lay out the history. The first field of psychology, of kind of cognitive psychology, it's shown on page 8 of your book, Wilhelm Wundt. Nice German name, huh? Wilhelm Wundt founded the first psychology lab in 1879 in Leipzig, Germany. And his approach was considered structuralism. And you can see what he basically trained people to do is he wanted to train people to be observers. Can they perceive the different sensations in their world? So he would train people to listen to sounds and report exactly how those sounds sounded. That doesn't sound right. Visually, he would train people to perceive the world and report on their sensations. So that was considered the world of structuralism. It really relied on something called introspection. Introspection, as you can see in your book, a technique in which trained participants describe their experience. So you would be asked, what's going on? How are you perceiving this? And he was really the founder of the whole psychology movement and really trained a lot of other people, including William James, on this idea of understanding the world around you. So that is the world of structuralism. But there were some problems with structuralism, and it was the next main movement in kind of experimental psychology, founded by Watson, the field of behaviorism, that really illustrated the problems with introspection. It was very much a type of technique based on self-report, so there could be a lot of biases. If you look and see what Watson had to say, there could be a lot of variability from people, person to person. The results were difficult to verify because you're talking about mental processes. You can't see mental processes. You can't understand mental processes. And so Watson and the rest of the behaviorists really didn't like this because it was really not so scientific. It was very subjective, prone to bias, tell me what you perceive, what you hear, and it wasn't scientific enough. So the field of behaviorism was kind of a big changeover from the field of structuralism. John Watson founded the field of behaviorism. I just want to kind of paint a picture for you, and the book actually adds some more details that you can have as well. Behaviorists really wanted to turn psychology into a science. Now, Wundt started that by having a lab and training people in introspection, but behaviorists wanted to make psychology much more like biology and chemistry, make it a real lab science. One of the things that really helped that movement was Darwin's book about the origin of the species, that said humans can really be thought of on the scale like any other animal, just a little higher up. So what Darwin did was useful, but what the behaviorists basically did is they wanted to really make psychology a science. And so in their eyes, they decided mental phenomenon couldn't be measured. And if you can't measure something, if you can't see it and measure it, then you really shouldn't study it. So all this mental stuff, all this cognitive activity was quickly thrown aside by the behaviorists. Instead, the behaviorists believed in stimulus and response. They used a lot of animals in their research, of course. Pavlov, training the dog, stimulus response, and the learning that occurs. So they use the term learning a lot. And so they very much believed that the environment can train anybody if you have the right reinforcement. Skinner was very big on reinforcement, classical conditioning, operant conditioning. So it was all very much stimulus and response. So that really did move psychology into a science. You could measure things. You could classify behavior. You could give a dog a reward. You could see how many times the animal pressed the bar. You could map from animals to humans because of Darwin's idea. So it was very much a research-based field, but it kind of completely ignored mental events and cognitive events, if you will. So let's see how long we're going on this one. Well, I think we can keep going here. So let's keep going here. And what do we got? So we've covered introspection and behaviorism. So there were some significant problems with behaviorism. And I think somewhere along here, it kind of starts to go in here. Looks like starting on page 11 and 12, people like Tolman started to talk about this idea of a cognitive map, that an animal, when you put it in a maze, runs around and explores it. When there's a real trial, it kind of has a cognitive map of where to go. So the term cognitive meant thought process. Now, Tolman wasn't necessarily really well liked by the strict behaviorists because they didn't want to look at mental phenomenon. There were a couple of other issues as well that I kind of want you to write about. One of the issues that happened is in the 50s, we started to get the computer age starting. So with the onset of computers, people started thinking about the human mind like a computer. And it was called the information processing age. So the idea of a computer, you have input, central processing, and output. Maybe the human mind is the same way. We have input, we have a central processor, a mind that can process that information and output. So computers and the human mind, as you can see on page 12, really started to get back into the swing of things. So that was one of the events that said, you know what, we really need to study some cognitive stuff. World War II. In World War II, we really needed to be training pilots to understand information and process information well when we were training them. And so the idea of how to train people, how to educate people, you have to understand things about language, about memory. So World War II, training and pilots, how to keep pilots aware and awake when they were flying. So this issue of attention. Attention is a cognitive field, so we really started studying a lot of that. So a lot of this is really based on World War II. And then finally, very interesting, if you look on page 12, language behavior. It turned out that language behavior was a real problem for behaviorists because Skinner, who was, of course, a person based on reinforcement, that you could change any behavior by reinforcement, he tried to write a book, and you can see it in there. In 1957, he wrote a book entitled Verbal Behavior, and he basically argued that all language formation from children was based on reinforcement. So he wrote the book saying, well, we can explain all language behavior on the basis of reinforcement. Well, as it turned out, a very famous linguist named Noam Chomsky read this book, and when he read this book, he wrote a scathing review of Skinner's book. He said, you cannot completely explain language behavior by just reinforcement. There's something, basically nature, there's some biological elements that are going on here. There's something really special about language. It's not just the nurturing environment. There's got to be something biological. There's got to be some inborn biological element in nature that allows people to understand language as well and process it. Kids go from just knowing a few words at the age of a year or two into having a language explosion years that basically allow them to generate all these new words. So Chomsky wrote a scathing critique of Skinner's book and said there's got to be more than this. And Chomsky is considered one of the founders of the cognitive psychology revolution. And so these events really led to the beginning of cognitive psychology. So I think I'm going to cut the acoustics here. I've got a little more to cover with the next one. What I'm looking for you to write up here is you can write little bullet point outlines if you want, but more to the point is little summaries where I can see that you've understood the main ideas I'm trying to share here in kind of a compact way. Thanks.